Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to week 6 of the English Essays course. And this is your video lecture in which today we'll be discussing another important aspect of writing essays, and that would be appeal. Okay, appeals, when we talk about that, is really just another kind of important aspect of rhetoric. Okay, and if you don't know what rhetoric is, it's really the art of persuasion. Okay, so what we'll talk about here today, like everything in this first 7 weeks, or the whole course really, it is cumulative. Okay, so we're going to continue learning on about all these practical skills and concepts. Today, again, being appeals. But our goal is to accumulate enough knowledge and understanding of practical skills and concepts to make us a well-rounded English essay writer. All right, so consider that. Now, what we'll talk about today in terms of appeals, it really connects back to something we studied earlier. If you remember when we studied the essential elements of writing, we talked about topic sentences for paragraphs, and then we also talked about the concept of unity, coherence, and adequate development. Now, when it comes to development, I think this is where you want to apply that concept of appeals, all right? The rhetoric of appeals. So that should be really helpful for you moving forward in writing your essays. Okay, no matter what essay you're writing, you have to consider appeals. All right, and again, whenever we're writing an essay, you always want to consider, what are you writing? Why are you writing it? What's your purpose? And who are you writing it for? All right, that's going to be especially important when we consider today's topic of appeals. All right, so keep that in mind. All right, just as a matter of where we are in the course, remember weeks 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, we're focusing on accumulating, gathering, understanding these basic skills and concepts. Then we're going to demonstrate those knowledge of those skills on the midterm test in week 8. And then finally in week 9, we'll really get started with the process of writing. So I do want to remind you again, we have 2 essays to write, and our essay writing will begin in week 9 after the midterm. However, as we are just learning skills and concepts now, you can also do well by preparing, thinking about, reading, researching a possible topic for your first essay, the term essay, which, to remind you, will be an academic, persuasive essay. All right, so think about an appropriate topic for an academic, persuasive essay. You don't have to write the essay. We will begin that process in week 9, but consider what is a good topic to write about for an academic, persuasive essay. All right. If you can do that and do some reading and do some research, try and make yourself an expert, then you will be well prepared for the writing of our first essay, the term essay, which we will begin in week 9. All right, so as I said, this week we're going to deal with appeals, which is connected to the idea of development. All right, so think about in your essay, right? In your essay you have a thesis, which is your main idea, but then you need to develop that idea. How do you prove it? How do you provide evidence? How do you convince your audience, or how do you persuade your audience? To persuade your audience, you must consider appropriate appeals. And that's what we're talking about today. So consider development and everything we studied. It's going to be important today too. What we considered when we discussed the use of language is going to be important when we discuss appeals. Okay, when we discuss development and thesis statements, they're also going to be important when we discuss appeals. All right, so again, what are appeals? Appeals are, well, think about the word appeal. If something is appealing, it means it is attractive. All right, you like it, right? The idea of sitting on a beach in Maldives is appealing. It's attractive. It's something I would like to do. All right. So when we talk about appeals in an essay, we are talking about making an argument and developing our essay in a way that appeals to the reader. We can make the reader attracted to our argument and therefore convince or persuade the reader. All right? That's what we're talking about, appeal. So it's how you, as a writer, can connect to your readers to persuade them and develop the argument of your essay. It is especially important in argumentative and persuasive essays. And when you consider 3 basic appeals that we will discuss today, this is nothing new. These go back to the ancient Greeks 2,000 years ago, and even before them. People have been talking about appeals and rhetoric ever since they began talking. Okay? So these are nothing new. All right, we're going to talk about 3 basic ones that actually have ancient kind of Greek names. They are logos, pathos, and ethos. All right, if those sound familiar, there's a good reason for that, because those words are used in modern English, and similar words with the same root are frequently used in English language as well. All right, so there's another aspect of today's lecture that I want to draw your attention to, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time on, and that is logical fallacies. All right, and that has to do with logos. But if you look at the notes that I've given you today, I've tried to keep it brief and just kind of cover the basics for appeals. But when we discuss logos, we really do have to consider logic and reason. And I could go on for a long time about logical fallacies. In fact, university courses are taught that only focus on logical fallacies. I've taken one of those courses before, a long time ago, when I was an undergraduate student too. All right, so I don't want to get into that in this short lecture. However, I have included in the materials some websites that you can go in and just easily browse logical fallacies. And I strongly and highly encourage you to do that also. All right, just make yourself aware of the different logical fallacies. All right, because when it comes to writing essays in English or in any language, it really comes down to how well you can think and organize, on top of being an excellent writer as well. But being a good writer means being a good thinker, and you have to use logic and be aware of these logical fallacies. All right, so again, when it comes to your tests, your midterm test, you do not need to know anything about logical fallacies. I'm not testing you on logical fallacies. but I just want to stress to you the importance of understanding them, because if you understand them, it will make you a better critical thinker, all right? And will improve your writing ability and your persuasive ability, especially when it comes to the kind of essays we're writing here. All right, so let's get into it then. Okay, we have 3 basic appeals, 3 ways to convince or persuade our reader in our essays. Again, as always, remind yourself, what are you writing? Is it an academic, persuasive essay, or is it a personal essay? Why are you writing it? Is your purpose to persuade somebody of a certain belief? Is your purpose to explore an argument? All right. And then also think about, who are you writing it for? Who is your audience? That will influence the language that you use, which will influence the appeal. It will influence the development, the evidence you choose to include in your essay, and that will influence your appeal. All right. All of these things come together when we talk about appeals. And the first one is logos. The logos appeal. All right. Does that sound familiar to you? Logos, right? I'm sure you know the word logo, right? You can see a logo. Here's, we got the Tommy logo somewhere right here, right? Tommy Hilfiger logo. That's a recognizable logo. Or the Nike swoosh is a logo. Or maybe you represent, you can understand that word logos in the word logic, logical. All right, that's the one we're getting at, but it comes from the same root word in Greek. So what is an appeal to logos? This is, simply put, an appeal to logic, an appeal to reason. All right. So basically, does what you're saying make sense? Is it logical? Is it rational? Is it reasonable? If it is, then you're making a logos appeal. All right. So usually these kind of arguments and appeals are given evidence with precedents from, all right, examples from the past. We appeal to logos by using facts and statistics, expert testimony, right? When we go talk to a doctor or a scientist, or we can use clear and specific, reasonable argument, all right? If X, then Y. All right. If we can present that kind of logical, reasonable explanation with examples, with statistics, with data, right? That is when we're trying to appeal to the logical nature of our argument. And that is logos. All right. So, like I said, this is where an understanding of logical fallacies is very helpful. Okay, so think about like a lawyer or a debater and how they construct an argument, right? If X, then Y, or A plus B equals C. You can do that with your thoughts as well, but you have to be honest with how you present those things. You have to avoid biases. You have to avoid fallacies. All right. So if you don't know what those are, again, I highly recommend that you look into the second website that I give you in the notes. Right? They go into some of the a brief understanding of what logical fallacies are. All right. So logos needs a bit of understanding of logical fallacies to improve and to improve your critical thinking. All right. also consider, where do you think logos is going to have the greatest effect, right? If you consider what you're writing. This is going to be your stronger appeal for your first essay, which is an academic persuasive essay. All right? Academics is going to focus more on logic because that's more appropriate. Okay? Reasonable, objective, rational. Okay? And that really compares to the next appeal that we'll look at, which is pathos. So, the second appeal, pathos, is going to be a more effective appeal, or generally used more in personal writing. Okay, so if you want kind of a simple explanation about the difference between these first two, you will more likely use logos appeal, logical appeal, for your academic essay, your first essay. But when you write your second essay, that will be a personal essay. And in a personal essay, a pathos appeal is going to more likely be reasonable. So what is pathos then, our second appeal? Again, I'm sure you recognize the root word, P-A-T-H, path. It's the same word that you will see in modern English words like sympathy or empathy. So here, this is an appeal to emotion, to human feeling. Okay, so it's in many ways kind of the opposite of the logos appeal. So instead of cold, hard logic and rational reason, now we're appealing not to the head or the mind, but to the heart, the emotional appeals. So to make a pathos appeal is to appeal to your audience beliefs and feelings, emotions. However, you have to be very careful. You have to be very emotionally intelligent when you consider when and how to use a pathos appeal. All right? Like I said, a logos appeal is more appropriate for an academic essay than a pathos appeal will be, because of what we're trying to do and who we're trying to persuade. Right? So consider, when you use a pathos appeal, who your audience is, what your thesis is, what your evidence is, and how you can appropriately use emotion to persuade your audience. All right? You cannot misjudge your audience's feelings given your topic and your thesis. Be careful what you assume about your audience. All right? Now, when it comes to writing, this is something that you will learn through experience. But you should be considering your audience and what they will think is appropriate for your topic and for your evidence. So you have to be intellectually honest. You have to be sincere. Okay? Don't sound like some cheesy lawyer who their only purpose is to persuade you by any way necessary. Okay? Don't use melodrama. Don't overuse emotion. That seems to cheapen the emotion, and it will seem you are kind of a cheap writer if you're relying too heavily on that emotion. So be careful. Again, you need to be emotionally intelligent when it comes to applying a pathos appeal. All right? So, again, be honest, be sincere, and don't raise emotional issues that are irrelevant to the argument. So if you think about your thesis and your topic and the evidence you're using, here, again, you have to consider you know, and why I've emphasized to you now to make yourself an expert on your topic, because an expert is going to not focus, is not going to only know one aspect of their topic. They might focus on an aspect of the topic in an essay, but that writer will know this side of the argument and this side of the argument in a persuasive essay, even though their thesis, their opinion, is focused on one section. So a good writer, again, has to be knowledgeable, has to be an expert of the topic, even if their thesis focuses on a more narrow and specific perspective. All right? And if you are not aware of the broader topic that you're writing about, then that will kind of many times lead you to avoid or completely ignore other arguments that are not included in your essay. Okay, and if your audience is aware of those other perspectives, they're not likely going to trust you, especially if you're doing this in an emotional appeal. All right. So again, be aware of what you are, how you are directing your argument, and what emotions and feelings you are allowing into this argument. So make sure you have a solid understanding of your full topic. All right. Just to move on to, like I said before, this kind of appeal, it's more common in personal writing or non-academic writing. All right. But just as a note now, and I'll emphasize this later, everything you write is probably going to include some logos appeal and some pathos appeal. But on like the scale of things, the more academic your writing is, the more it's going to use logos appeal. The more personal your writing is, the more you're going to use pathos appeal. But every writer's probably going to be somewhere in between, based on how much logos appeal they use or how much pathos appeal they use. Again, depending on what you're writing, why you're writing it, who you're writing it to. All right. Now, when you consider pathos too, you also have to consider the tone of your voice. All right, especially in the word choices you make. So think back to week 1 when we discussed the use of language. All right, certain words have certain meanings. Certain words hold certain emotions. So should you be more logical and reasonable and objective in your writing, in a more academic writing, then you're probably going to use a logos appeal and use those objective words. But when you start using words that hold emotions, words that hold judgments and opinions, they become more subjective. And if they become more subjective, then you're making more of a pathos appeal. So a good writer is going to be very careful, again, with the language that he or she uses, because the language affects the appeal. All right, so be careful about the tone that you're using, the words that you're using, and what kind of emotions they might hold. This is something that you want to pay special attention to because you are a non-native speaker of English, and it is difficult. So that's why we're going to use the writing process here. So when you're writing, consider it. When you're editing your paper and your classmates' paper, consider the use of language, especially then. And then before you submit your final essay, make sure that the language is clear and therefore it's obvious what your appeal is. All right. There are other aspects here too, right? In the tone that you give, it's not just the emotions, but are you being serious, or are you being light, or even humorous? How formal should your language be? And how can you best connect to the reader? All right. The more formal you are, the more objective you are. It might seem a little bit colder. And then the more colloquial or informal you might be, that's more personal and warmer and conversational. But again, is it appropriate? Okay. So consider that. In some cases, you can even use imagery and description to connect the reader. So that really involves a lot of word choice. All right. Take, for example, simple words like child. All right. In an academic essay, you're going to want to use the word child, right, instead of a word like kid. Right? By using the word child, that's more academic in its language, and that's going to create that appeal, logos appeal, rather than using kid, which is kind of informal and warmer and conversational. So that affects the kind of pathos, more of a pathos argument, because you're using a more emotional, warmer, conversational word. Little choices even there affects these kinds of things. All right, so keep that in mind when you choose, again, logos or pathos. Right, they seem to be kind of the divide, as I said earlier. Logos, logic, reason, okay, more academic, more formal. Pathos, an appeal to feelings and emotions, generally more personal. So our first essay, an academic persuasive essay, we're going to use more of a logos appeal. In our second essay, a personal persuasive essay, we're typically going to use more of a pathos appeal. But it really depends on, even then, what you choose as your topic and your tone and your thesis. Okay, so that might change. But we're going to use some sort of combination, all right, on the scale of logos, pathos. All right, and that brings us to the third and final appeal, which is ethos, which is an appeal to ethics. All right, that's kind of where you might recognize this word, ethos, ethics. But I think it best translates if you want to talk about the trust. All right, how do you build an ethos, a belief, a trust in the writer? To build an ethos appeal, and that means the reader trusts you, the writer. It means you have to demonstrate a clear understanding of how to use logos appeals effectively. All right? How can you construct a logical argument? All right? One that uses the best information and avoids logical fallacies and biases. Also, to build the ethos or the trust of the audience, a good writer needs to understand where emotion can be used, appropriately used in his or her essay. Okay, like I said, academic essays lean towards logos, personal essays lean towards pathos, but you will use some sort of combination of the two in all of your writing. Okay? And to understand how to do that effectively is going to build the ethos appeal. It's going to build the trust of your audience in you, the writer. So, in many ways, ethos is the result of a combination of logos and pathos, because the writer demonstrates that he or she understands those other appeals too. All right? So the trust is developed by the writer for proving that he or she is a fair, competent, rational thinker and one with expertise on all perspectives of the subject. All right. In many ways, the writer even concedes points that seem to counter his or her argument and then refutes them when it is possible. So, as I mentioned earlier, a good writer needs to have an understanding, as much of an understanding of the topic that he or she is writing about. Even though the essay might focus on one aspect, you have to do some research, all right, and make yourself an expert on the topic, because you might have an audience member that is also an expert on the topic, and there's going to be an expectation. And if you, the writer, avoid or ignores one perspective or one argument or one counterpoint, then that is not intellectually honest. All right? And that will hurt your ethos appeal. All right? Now, if you remember a long time ago when I talked about the different sections of an essay, there was possibly a refutation. Okay, this is where that becomes important too. And this is where everything, comes together. When you talk about the section of an essay, here we also have to understand how that works to understand appeals. So, a writer may include a refutation to help build the ethos of his or her essay. Okay? Because including a refutation demonstrates the writer understands and knows where the audience might criticize your thesis and your development. All right? And you're predicting that, which demonstrates, right, that you are an expert and should be trusted on this topic. So that also helps to demonstrate or to create an ethos appeal. All right. Other things to consider for building an ethos, right? We talked about the use of language. The use of language is also important, not just in understanding logos and pathos, but also ethos. All right. For example, know your audience. Who are they? If you're writing an essay to teachers and you use teacherly language, you're demonstrating your knowledge of that topic. If you're a doctor and you're writing some essay and your audience is doctors, you can use that jargon, okay, that vocabulary that is specific to doctors. However, if you're writing a general essay to the general public, maybe it's an editorial in a newspaper, you want to avoid jargon, because if you use too much jargon or specific vocabulary for experts, most people will not understand what you're saying, and that will hurt your ethos because it shows that you don't understand your audience. And if you don't understand your audience, it is not only difficult for me to understand what you're saying, but it's difficult for me to trust you to know that you are an expert on your topic as well. So again, to create an ethos appeal, we have to better understand the language choices that we make. All right. Also, on top of that, we really need to consider writing skills, right? Understanding the form of an essay, introduction, thesis, body, conclusion. We need to demonstrate that we understand that form. Otherwise, people will think we're bad writers. We don't know how to write essays. If you don't know how to write an essay, why would I believe what you have to say? All right. The same thing with grammar and spelling and all the little things that go into your writing as well. All right. If you don't edit your essay and eliminate all the spelling and grammar mistakes, I'm going to think that you're not very good with the language. And if you're not very good with the language, I think overall maybe you're not a smart person. Okay? Maybe you are. You might have the best ideas ever for your topic and for your thesis, but you're just a sloppy, careless writer. But if people think that you are sloppy and careless, it means they will less likely trust you and the ideas that you have. So again, another way to build ethos is to avoid as many of the mistakes in grammar and spelling that we can. All right, and one last thing too, more specifically, again, following conventions, the way things are normally done, and the difference between, personal or conversational and academic, and we'll look at both this semester, right? In the first term essay, the first essay we write, it is an academic persuasive essay. You will want to avoid using exclamation marks or sarcasm or biased words, because that will kind of take away from your objectivity, and that will really hurt your ethos. Okay, now when you're writing a more personal essay, the second essay we'll write, okay, that's going to be different, and you're allowed a lot more flexibility. But even then, when you're writing a personal essay, you have to maintain the same correct tone. So you still have to understand your audience, your topic, and your tone, even though it's a personal essay, because you can't just use things without really thinking about their effect on the audience as well. So you don't have to include conversational, colloquial, personalized idioms in a personal essay as well, right? Depends on your topic and your tone. So just consider that as well. Some people might think, oh, writing a personal essay is easier because there are less rules and it's less formal. Well, in many ways, writing a personal essay can be more difficult because you have less restriction, less limitation on the language you can use. So you have to really demonstrate a solid understanding of the language that you're using there. So again, be careful. Otherwise, it will hurt your ethos as a writer. Okay, so those are all aspects of ethos as well. Okay, so again, ethos, developing an ethos appeal means you make the audience trust you. Okay, you make the audience trust you by using logos and pathos appeals appropriately, as well as using the language appropriately. You understand the form of the essay appropriately, and you demonstrate, a solid understanding of grammar and spelling and convention as well. Okay, that will build a trust in the reader. All right, so any essay you write will potentially use all of these appeals, but they will do it in totally different ways, depending on what you're writing, why you're writing, who you're writing it to. All right, so as I said before, your academic essay is going to lean heavily on logos, but you will use pathos too. And your second essay is going to lean probably more heavily on pathos, but you will use logos too. And for both of them, you must develop an ethos appeal and demonstrate that you are to be believed, you are trustworthy as a writer. Okay, that's kind of a simple way of understanding these three appeals. All right, to give a little bit of a demonstration, I've included an example at the end of your notes. Okay, simple paragraph, I think 3 simple sentences. Let's read them and then see if we can identify how these appeals work. Okay, first sentence. Advertising should show more physically challenged people. Second sentence. The hundreds of thousands of disabled Canadians have considerable buying power, yet so far advertisers have made no attempt to tap that power. Third sentence, further, by keeping the physically challenged out of the mainstream depicted in ads, advertisers encourage widespread prejudice against disability, prejudice that frightens and demeans those who hold it. All right, take a minute to, you can pause here and think about these three sentences, all right, and think about how they work. Where is the logos appeal? Where is the pathos appeal? How is ethos created? Okay, three simple sentences that really develop one main idea. Okay, and go back and we can consider coherency and how we construct logic. All right, we have our first sentence. It is a clearly worded statement. Advertising should show more physically challenged people. That's in a statement. It's almost like a thesis. All right, but we need to develop that idea. Okay, it's one thing to say that. Right, I can tell you that if you're listening to me, right? But you might say, why? All right, why is that necessary? Okay, so I need to develop this idea to be more persuasive. How do I do that? I can do that by appealing to your logic and by appealing to your emotion and by creating a trust in you that what I'm saying is trustworthy. So if we look at sentence 2, all right, our first sentence, advertising should show more physically challenged people, simple statement. Sentence 2, the hundreds of thousands of disabled Canadians have considerable buying power, yet so far advertisers have made no attempt to tap that power. All right, this is a logical appeal. All right, why? So consider, why should advertising show more physically challenged people? Because consider what advertiser's goal is. An advertiser is trying to make more money for a business, right? How do you make more money? Well, it says, consider how many disabled Canadians there are. Consider how much money they have. If you don't advertise, you can't get their money, or you're less likely to get their money. So, therefore, advertisers should show more physically challenged people, and the companies that they advertise for will make more money. That's logical. That's reasonable. That's rational. Okay, but the author doesn't stop there. In the third sentence, we get this transition word, further. Further, by keeping the physically challenged out of the mainstream depicted in ads, advertisers encourage widespread prejudice against disability. Prejudice that frightens and demeans those who hold it. All right, so what is this sentence doing? This sentence is appealing to our hearts, right? We're appealing to emotions in this case. The first appeal was logos, talking about economics of money. The third sentence is appealing to our hearts, right? If advertisers block out physically challenged people, it means that we are not welcoming those people into society. And if we don't welcome into society, it creates a negative kind of stereotype. It prejudices disabilities. It frightens or scares. It demeans or puts down, insults those disabled people, right? So consider the language here, right? We're appealing to emotions, okay? Prejudice, frighten or scare, demean, insult. Those words are very subjective. They talk about our feelings, our emotions, to be scared, to be insulted. These are pathos words. This is a pathos appeal. It appeals to us as human beings and our sense of emotion. Okay? So, there you have it. We have a logos appeal to the money that disabled people have and can spend. And we have an emotional appeal that means if advertisers should show more physically challenged people to welcome them into society. Okay, so by showing two sides or two aspects of appeal, that demonstrates the reader has an ethos. It can be the writer can be trusted. If we look at the way this short paragraph is organized with a clearly worded statement or main idea, which is advertising should show more physically challenged people, and it is developed by a logos argument or logos appeal and a pathos appeal in this nicely organized way, that demonstrates this writer is a very careful, critical, and organized thinker, which means I trust their ability to write. Also, the use of language, as I mentioned earlier, especially in the pathos appeal. This is adequate, all right? It's a fair representation. I don't think many people would disagree with this pathos argument. I think we would all probably agree with it, all right? So that, again, helps to build the ethos of the writer. And of course, there are no spelling mistakes. There are no grammar mistakes. It is perfectly grammatically written, and that further develops the credibility or the ethos appeal of the writing. Okay, so hopefully this just gives you a very simple example of these three simple appeals. Okay, these three simple ways of attracting our audience to what we have to say and making our audience believe us, persuading, convincing them. All right, logos, pathos, ethos, appeals. All right, this is a very simple, straightforward discussion, but I've included some more materials here. Again, I want to emphasize to be a better writer, especially dealing with logos, go check out the website from the Purdue website, the OWL Writing Lab. They, in the logo section, will explain many logical fallacies. That is a wonderful thing for you to know, but I will not be testing you on it. But if you start to understand that, it will make you a better critical thinker. It'll allow you to better develop logos appeals, and that means you can write essays better. All right, so check out those other web pages and grow your knowledge. And if you can walk away with just a basic understanding and you're conscious and aware of how we can appeal to our audience, take that away from this lecture, and I'll ask you to demonstrate that on the midterm as well. Okay, that's it for now, everybody. Good luck. We have one more thing to discuss before the midterm, and that is in week 7. Take care.